We have a very interesting talk today. I'm pleased to announce that we have Tom Howard here to talk on personal papers and account books and diaries in relationship to doing your genealogy. Tom has been a past president of NERC, which is the New England Regional Genealogical Council, and they put on biannual conferences in New England. He has been a vice president of the Connecticut Society of Genealogists out of East Hartford, and he has been involved in the Professional Genealogical Council of Connecticut. He's a professional genealogist, and we're happy to have Tom back. He has done a talk before on the smallpox cemetery, as well as researching Irish ancestors. Tom Howard.
Thank you very much. Well done. It's nice to see everyone. The few of us, this is a beautiful day, so we're inside, right? My wife and I were at the State Library doing research yesterday, the other beautiful day in 2050, right? Anyhow, we do our passionate thing, research, and over the years, personal papers have been not a concern, but a great interest of mine. Years ago, I was a social studies teacher at Suffield High School and had occasion to do a federal project on records that were on a town like Suffield, then 350 years old, that could have great benefit to students, whether it's 5th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade, and so on in high school. And so it was during the bicentennial, and so the money was there to hire us part-time, and we researched Suffield history and Suffield records. And Simsbury certainly has the same kinds of records, but we found 40,000 documents, some only slips of paper, but others pretty good stuff, like personal papers, account books, and things. And we were able to extract a lot of materials from them that were appropriate for grade school and high school. And so we had a Suffield history course for many years that was very popular because it was a research course. And at that time, we had to use microfilm for all the census records. Today, it's on the internet, and they can use it on their laptops in the schools and so on. Anyhow, personal papers we found were probably one of the best ways to hook kids into looking up information on people. Just what are those personal papers? Account books and diaries, this is what we're going to try to address. Where are they? What are they? And how can they be helpful to us in doing our family history? Account books have a number of names, just like diaries do, in the sense that they're called different things to different folks. Day books or ledgers, but they all include the same kind of information. Debits, when you see a D or debit, that's what the owner owed to somebody else. The credits are what other people were paying him to do. So, once you understand that, I mean, you had a debtor and you had a creditor. Somebody's doing something and they're getting paid for it. And these books kept track of that because there was no internet, what's that internet field you put your income tax on and all kinds of things. You had to keep track with these books. And account books were everywhere because most everybody were farmers, and they kept track of who did what for whom. It included labor and time expended, the property that the person owned, like a pair of oxen you're going to see referred to in a couple of samples I have here, or their sons' labor, the family outlay of labor or use of their own property. And it tells you a lot about people who would be your relatives. For one thing, they're timed. They're in a given place. We want anything on our people, but everything is local. Everything is specific to a time. an event. It's kind of like any piece of paper is a time machine at that moment. After that, you have to have another piece of paper to know. But sometimes you can reconstruct a life when you have pieces of paper representing different times. And account books are very good that way, because neighbors did help neighbors, but they kept track of what was done between neighbors, between each other. And you had 2 account books. You can count on it, because the debtor had his, the creditor had his, and vice versa. And every 6 months or so, they would say, why don't we have a reckoning? And they would sign off on their own account books. Each would sign the account that this is settled, because they had to give it's a bartering system of labor and material and so on. And when you get to that 6 months, you're adding value there. You're actually using numbers. Before the revolution, or at least the creation of the new country, that is, new government, the shillings and pounds and pence were used. And of course, when the dollar came in as currency, it was used. But everything, that labor, that material, was given a hard value and added up. 6 months credit, 6 months debit, they had to equal, or else you provided more service, use of your oxen, so many bushels of wheat of a value equal to what's remaining in your settlement, because money was very scarce. And that's why these books were very important, very treasured. But as time goes on, the most common book around, account books, begin to get scarce. And we'll see why as we go along here. Finding them first and then using them effectively, because they're handwritten and sometimes they're hard to read, especially when they get onto microfilm. Locating them, of course, and your people depends on where your people were. You need to know what state and what town they're in. You can find account books everywhere, but a lot of them won't have your person in there. It's who was in the neighborhood. You'll see in our particular research and writing, we have used account books because we happen to be in the right place at the right time, researching the people who were there and knew the neighbors and tripped over, them as we were going from library to library. And we'll tell you about one. But reading something like this, and just look at the date here. Jonathan Wheeler, Stonington, 1745. How many records do we even have from the early 18th century? So reading them is a challenge. It wasn't for us. Remember, we were school teachers. We read your handwriting. I'm trying to say. And if you could read the kids' handwriting, this stuff is nothing. Although you have to realize that second S looks like an F. And you keep telling yourself these things. And then once you have what the words are, what did they mean by it? What are they talking about? Obviously, they're talking about things they understand. And they're using the language of the service, of the whatever the animal was called or what they were doing. And sometimes you have to know the times in which you're overcoming roadblocks. I mean, that's one of my messages to you. You got to know the times in which these people lived. And finally, indexing is a challenge because, they were working people and they didn't always put things in the index. But they did have indexes because they wanted to see what they did, their dealings with these other people over time, and what they charged them for the use of, say, the oxen or carrying your iron from the foundry someplace, so that you've got consistent value here. And so they did, in the front of the book, there will be a rough index, but they also had accounts with the same person, generally in the same area, so that after a settlement they would start a new one with that same person. Okay. Most are readable, although you look at this one, you say, well, that doesn't look readable to me. And this is from Windsor, William Stoughton, 1850. But you get up close and you look at it, and you can see the debtor over here, and their names very clear, and on the other side, the creditor, and they're arranged by people, and it's very clear. If you were looking at the originals, that's better, yeah. In some places, because many of these books have survived in institutions like this one, there has been work to index them more systematically. And this happened to be, I think it might have been at Windsor, Historical Society. I don't remember, but if it's Stoughton, it is. Anyhow, all the people who were in the book, the years inclusive, and the page number would be there. Other places, the accounts are not well identified. Now, this is a book I bought at Papermania that came to Hartford about 8 years ago. This is an account book, and the seller, who was from Windsor, didn't know who the person was. All he knew is at the top line over there, it says East Granby. And this is and my point here is that accounts of merchants or store or mill owners are best. Why? More people deal with them. And often from a wider area, not just a town. My challenge was, whose account book was this? Honestly, I opened it up. Well, I'll get back to it. I wanted to make sure you understood some of the diversity of the account books. But all these are names, okay? All these are names. I looked in this just one page, and I knew those people. As a local historian, come back to you and show you what else I had that gave me the name. You'll see what I mean. So clever, Not really. But common books like account books get disconnected from their owners. People die, leave their account books. Grandsons, uncles, or the in-laws take over the property. They sell the property, and all you have on there are 2 or 3 of the dusty old leather-covered books. Oh, they're just business accounts. Who cares? They chuck them. Or somebody comes in and cleans out the house, and they end up at Papermania, like that book. The owners get disconnected from them for that reason. They're thrown away. More and more are being preserved, however, as people like me find them and begin to understand these are lists of names. That's all genealogists want. Books with lists of names, because maybe one of them will be mine, my person is my point. And these books end up getting to the historical societies and so on, and end up on microfilm. We'll come back to this again, because all of these are microfilm. And of course the trend is to digitize these. And then when that starts happening, and you're able to put indexes on the digital as well, or I keep trying to encourage institutions like the Connecticut Historical Society to not only have them on microfilm, but put the index on the internet. The index will be there, but if they want to see it, they have to come to the office or pay $5 here to see the one that is on the microfilm. Well, however, it raises revenue. Anyhow, what do the account books contain? Obviously, names. And that's very important to genealogists. They also provide you a list of amounts and what was exchanged on a given day. These are time capsules. And this one was for the period like 1861 or 58 on. But look at 480 page right here. But this was an important one to me because, as I said, as I looked over these names, I knew who these people were. So I knew it was also an East Granby book, but I knew about this series of count books because they had been divvied up, just like some diaries I'm going to show you. They didn't stay with the family. They got split up. And they end up in different places, the same diary series. But try to figure this out. 60 names per page, 480 pages, 7,680 names. Of course, there are going to be repeats. East Granby population was only 833. But we know it was a grist mill, it was a lumber mill, okay? And it was an important institutional presence. My concern when I got it was to prove whose account book was it. So we went back to the book, and since I knew who these people were, I went to the one where I found the Clarks. This is Clark, and it's the $2 figure, and I just kept looking for other Clarks, in particular Elmer Clark. Why? Because I had his diary. And all I had to do was go to the date that is listed on the side here. And with the integration of diaries and account books or other records, census records, you begin to see how they work. So I went to Elmer Clark's journal, and he had two of them. He had one for 44 to 55 in the 19th century, and the second one was a 14-inch long diary, all by date, of course. And I went to February 1861, and here he says, drew 40 bushels of corn to H&E cases and got 80 cartons for 60 pounds of corn, whatever, and how much it cost them. What I grew up with this guy because we got this early, and I discovered it when we were doing that federal project for Suffield High School. And I always admired what he did on Sunday. Can you read that?
No, we can't read that.
Sunday, read and wrote. Nothing else. You got to understand, we live in the subs. We have a full week of work. And what do we do on Saturdays? We work. What do we do on Sundays? Well, you hope you go to church, if only to rest. He read and wrote every Sunday. I said, that was awesome. Of course, he happened to be the town clerk of East Granby, so he had a lot of things to write, too. And he had a pretty good handwriting.
And he was no longer a farmer, or he couldn't have done that on...
No, he was a farmer.
Really?
He was a
He
farmer.
had somebody else doing his chores.
His farm was at the corner of Route 20 in the center of East Granby and 187. That's where Combustion put up that long building, which is now a small shopping center. His old colonial house was right there in the corner. And he got that from his father, Horace. But we'll get to that when we deal a little more with the diaries. But this is how we knew this day book from 1859 to 64 belonged to Henry Case of East Granby, who was the mill operator on the Farmington River, just south of where the dam used to be. And that dam is no longer there, of course, but it would be on the south side of Farmington, the south bank, no, the north bank of the Farmington River, that's right, it's going to the east. Anyhow, the account books are important because they have lots of names and they can be used to pinpoint where people were at a given month and day. They give day-to-day transactions and interactions, especially with neighbors. Debits, credits, all labor and services had a price, and settling up meant signatures are there as well. You know, it's the routine activities that define our life. It's where we went to school, it's where, you know, we went to church. It's the center routine, the circles of our life. And account books kind of represent, just like some diaries do, as you'll see in a moment, people talk to people they see every day, okay? They're not going to be taking a car, you know, to Windsor Locks or to Suffield a lot. But if there's a mill up there in Suffield, Elmer Clark went there. And he came over here to Tarryville as well, and to Simsbury, the rest of the town, in different times, different places. And he mentioned where they went. But they know where the place is. They don't say where it is. Went to Cases, went to Moore's, went to this, to get this and that. But it's, and you could plot that on a map, and it goes in every direction. And so I challenge my kids, tell me where this guy lived. One, that it was a guy. Sure, it's not a woman? And then you start discussing about gender kind of specialization on the farms of the 19th century, and so on. Routine activities and values. Occupations are, you know, what defines us. Even today, farmers specialize. I mean, they work their tails off every season to get enough food, enough plants in for fibers, for clothing, enough animals, and so on. And they are always trying to get ahead. They're trying to have more than they need so they can sell it and get that capital, get that credit that might allow them to buy other things. So it turns out account books show the specialization of people who were called farmers. But on the side, you're going to see they were shoemakers, or they specialized in lumber. They might have had a small sawmill and so on. So account books can be very, very, very helpful. Now diaries can be too. What's interesting is that there were more account books, probably per capita, than diaries. But diaries are published more often than account books. So it's the commonality of some things that devalue them in a way. But it's also the personal attributes of each that makes diaries even more valuable than account books. And consequently, you will find more published diaries everywhere. Joshua Hempstead is a good case in point. Look at, again, it's in the middle of the 18th century. I mean, you don't have vital records in those days. I mean, you're lucky to really get the child named. Not until the 19th century are they required to keep birth, death, and marriage records. He kept it daily, to the point where he was used by government to confirm what happened on a given day. And that's not just the weather, but when somebody died. Because he often buried him or made a casket for him. It's so especially, and he didn't keep an index like this, I'll tell you that, but because it was so valuable in New London, they published it, made up the index, and my particular, well, he's not in this one, the Stanton line is one I've worked hard on to learn more and more. Anyhow, Thomas Stanton was dead by the time he comes along, but their descendants, in my case John and John, were not in New London any longer. But anyhow, a diary contents also are datable, routine and unusual events, and weather. Account books usually didn't say what the weather was. Weather was so important to these farmers, but they kept track of it through their journal. Diaries also are called journals to men. You know, the sexist view. Diaries are girls or women. Not really, not really. Diaries are a generic term. And they would talk about travels, visitations, associations, vital records were made. The bell tolled the death of so-and-so. And associations, how do you know? Well, because people are mentioned. And they're mentioned as Tom came today. Who the heck is Tom? She didn't have to, or he didn't have to include the last name because he knew. He didn't have to tell himself. There's only Tom, there's Harry, Bill, or, you know, Mrs. So-and-so. Okay? Well, if it's Mrs. So-and-so, it's not going to be a sister. It's not going to be a father or a mother or a grandfather, you know? Nana came over today, but you don't know who Nana is yet. But you see what I'm trying to say? There's an assumption of things in life that we don't write down. We know it. So these are personal stories and associations and opinions, sentiments, and so on. Elmer Clark's diary was pretty much weather and day-to-day events. He was a man, like his father, was involved with the politics of the day. He was a Democrat, and probably one of the reasons why East Granby split from Granby, because that's where the Democrats were and the Republicans were over in Granby. And that may be why Granby split from Simsbury at one time and took Turkey Hill with it. And then 50 years later, they said, we're out of here, you know, 1858. And their diaries are reflecting the conventions and where they're going to. And their international or national news mentions Jackson, you know, as President Jackson came to Hartford, went to see him, you know. And they barely mention Abe Lincoln getting shot. And that was because the Democrats split between those who favored, it's not South, but independence as a way, and conservative Democrats, liberal Democrats, you might say, and the Republicans. It was a three-way split, and that's how Lincoln won the election in Connecticut. Anyhow, their opinions get in there, and Elmer, I can remember reading this, and I said, wow. He lamented the fact that he's seeing these girls that he knew, went to school with, and he's getting older, and he's still not married, and there's no prospect for me. And he's working his butt off and falling asleep as he's taking the wagon from the center of East Granby out to the plains, which is Windsor Locks, the airport area, okay? And he falls off the wagon, and the wagon nearly goes over him, loaded, and it scared the devil out of him, but he's so exhausted, and it's the only time he's really said, what am I doing? I'm working my heart out, and I'm not going to have, you know, a woman to help me and be with me. And, you know, small town kind of experience. Anyhow, it could be a lot of things that you find in the diaries, and frankly, in the account books. I've seen the list in the account books, like the Stoughton account book in Windsor, listed the whole family. I borrowed one from a fellow teacher one time from the Sheldon family, and in it, it had all the generations and how many from these two who came over on the boat. And now we have like 350. Talk about population explosion in one family, you know? And you can see that that's true for all of us, with that being a huge multiplier. But as a favorite diary of mine is Elmer Clark's. And it didn't happen this way. His first early diaries were very similar to his father's, in which they mixed up the weather and activities every day. But when he started this new book, which is 14 inches long and had a leather binding, he decided to put the left-hand side, the weather. So he's got a daily temperature for 44 years. And he paid $1 for that thermometer. and he put it on in the shady part of one of the porches. And and then the other side were the activities. You know, Porter and I, you know, went there, and or it's in January or February, we had to slaughter, you know, the animals at this time and work. Or they went to the orchard today. It was day to day seasonal activities. You know, when they cut the wood and when they moved the animals from place to place. He kept this journal from 1844 until about a year before he died in, I think, 1886. He started it the day his father died. And that was the first entry in his journal. And what's important here is his father kept the journal from in late 1700s to 42. So why did he keep it? Well, farmers wanted to know the weather. And there were times when an unusual storm came, huge, you know, and you know when it comes August, September, you got a hurricane coming up. Or hail the size of so-and-so. And they would meet. You can see Elmer meeting at the church across the street. The Congregational Church was diagonally from his house. And talking with neighbor here, neighbor there, and they're bringing their book. They're bringing their diaries, their journals. Can you ever remember such a heavy rain in, you know, whatever, it's October or ice, and they're going through all their Octobers, you know? The same way I did with his, to see what the record low or high was, or unusual weather. And they kept these for a reason, to know what the weather had been like. What is the pattern of temperature that says, this is the week we plant our peas? Because they're cold weather plants, right? When do we do the other things? He was a town clerk. The bell tolled for someone. There's going to be a death record. There's going to be an inquest if it was unusual. And there's going to be reference to it with land transactions. So knowing when somebody died was important to him as a town clerk. But many who kept the journals, who weren't, wanted to keep track of who went. Anyhow, it was daily work, it was seasonal work, and so on. It was very important. Now, what would a young girl, a preteen record, be keep in her record or diary? Well, let's see.
What she sewed. Tiny one.
I'm going to show you what she did, because I use this one in class. Here's the diary. Here's the text of the diary. And I use this in class because I wanted them to start figuring things out. You know, was this person a girl or a boy? How old was this person? Well, it wouldn't take long. Saturday the 15th of December, cut a lining for my gray dress. Okay? And later on, she's talking about meetings and where Mama's going and Daddy. Oh, Dandy got away from Papa this morning when he was harnessing. Papa was going to the spring. So who's Dandy? You picture a dog, but you don't necessarily harness a dog. It's probably the pony or something, so Dad had to go chase it all over town. Byron was here after some oil. Wednesday the 8th of February, stormy. Teacher is cross today. Perhaps she has reason to be. So how old is she so far?
She's in school.
She's in school, but yet here it is, February 13th. Byron Goddard died today. His wife died a few weeks ago. Now, you know she doesn't have a lot of room. There's like 4 days on each page, 3 days on each page. And this is a printed form. You can get the blank and then fill it in. You know, there's so much room. And the dates are up here. So these are annuals, and you go to store and you get the next year's, you know, or the next month's. Doesn't have the whole year in one of these. But anyhow, there are a couple of other good ones. Went to meeting again. Mrs. Arthur Griffin was here. And you see, here's a lot of names Griffin in there, so you're going to get the idea they're related. And they were. Ma, Pa, and Mary went over to Aunt Ida's today. Another clue. Well, who has an Aunt Ida, right? So Aunt Ida is going to be a sibling of either mother or father, and so on. So you can build, and these were clues. In others, I was trying to get the kids to be detectives. What are you learning here? You got a clue. This is a person, but their circles are being identified through their words. Raining like shot. My toothaches. Fred is looking over. Dear me, underlined. Clear but awful cold. I have received no Valentine this year. Did not expect any. Parentheses, wish I had one. You see what I'm trying to say? This is a person's diary. Here, and you'll find some other ones. I have concluded, this is Saturday the 25th of February, 1888. It snows, period. I have concluded that Tom is of the other sex. Work on that. Now, I mean, you can conjure all kinds of things. What happened, you know? Mama has been mending all day. Anyhow, you might want to pass that around. And it will give you some idea of what a teenage girl by the name of Laura Griffin, who lived in Granby, East Granby, had to say. And I used that in class, and I had to copy the page from that 1 month because it had clues to what age she was, and gender certainly became obvious after a couple of lines. Now, I mentioned Elmer Clark. His father was Horace Clark, and this is one section of his diary, 1833 to 34. There were 4 or 5 sections because these were hand-woven pages. And when he died, or more likely when Elmer died, these diaries were available. And Horace's diary got divided up into different places. I found it at Connecticut, part of it at Connecticut Historical Society. I found it at, and this is his whole family, and this is a copy of it. And you can see it, the 2 pages are 12 inches, and they're handwritten. And part of it is in Suffield, part of it was at Old Sturbridge Village. And so parts of it still don't exist or haven't been found. They're in private hands. But anyhow, you can see how it's written, and I finished getting the hay in except for Owen's, whatever, and the values he placed on it. And we're talking about like from 1782 to 1842. And then his son goes to 1886. You almost have a century between 2 people in one family. And obviously, if it's your family, there's a lot there. Now, you may be related to Horace, but you won't be related to Elmer except indirectly because he didn't have any children, didn't marry. But this diary was used at Old Sturbridge Village. And they helped us at Suffield to realize how good primary documents could be in a classroom. And we followed it right up to many, many diaries and many, many other documents as well. Another outstanding diary is this one of Thomas B. Hazard of Kingston, Rhode Island. Again, look at the date, 1778 to 1840. This is a black hole for many genealogists. You can't, I'd say most of the roadblocks that I get as a professional to help with are people who are living out of state, for one thing, and can't get here. But even if they are, they've been working 30 years trying to find something on somebody who was in the 1850 census in Michigan, or in one of the other states, and it said this person was born in Connecticut, like in 1798. You know, that's tough. I mean, birth records are not there. You're lucky if you know the denomination of the person, that record might be in a baptismal. But, you know, right now, I'm sure the baptismal I'm looking for, well, I'm not sure. I'm still hunting. I'm always confident it's going to be in the next book I'm looking at. But geez, you know, they could have been an itinerant minister servicing the western Connecticut towns, and that person could have come out of New York, towns in New York, and it could the records could be in his center's baptismal marriage records. But this diary was printed, and it's and obviously gets indexed, and it's incredible. But observations on the weather, well, we knew that was coming. But records of birth, marriage, and deaths, transactions by barter and money of varying value, preaching, friends, and neighboring gossip, printed, written, introduced by Caroline Hazard. And so it's an incredible book. But in one of the libraries out there, they all have that book. But John Sterling, really hardworking researcher of cemeteries in particular, extracted every death record from that book and just came up with this. And so in the Kingston Library, I was able to look at this and make a copy of it and see if any of the people I was looking for died, because the death records are not going to be in the town hall for early records. So what do you need to know to find the account book or the diary? Obviously, you need a name. Otherwise, how will a list of names be of any help to you? But you do know that, all right? You know who your people were, when they lived, generally, where they lived, and the names of their neighbors, maybe. I hope what you do now is realize it's important when you look at the census records to look at the neighbors. And don't be surprised if you find some with the same surnames. But don't be surprised if they're not your surname, but don't think of them as unrelated. You know those women, they always marry and change their name, just to try to confuse us. But those census records will give you that name. And so will the probate record, and so on. You have to have a timeline in mind, and it would be a helpful thing to check the finding aids. A couple I'll show you in a minute. But here is a population census. It's important to always look on people next door. Go to the previous page. Here's a family. Well, that probably continues from the other one. They didn't waste a single line. So it's important to see who's around them, because if it's an account book that you're looking at or trying to understand whose account book might be relevant, these neighbors say in 1840, and that's one where you don't have all the children listed, but you know there are children. By having that neighbor's account book, you may learn a lot. How about the agricultural census? These are fantastic, and the good thing about them is they go farm to farm. So there likely be neighbors here, and you can see what they did for a living in terms of farming, what their specialization were. Some had more eggs than the others. Others had pigs as opposed to cows, and so on and so forth. Others had orchards, so the chances are there's going to be cider and brandy, maybe one as a side product from their agriculture. So it's important to realize that people do live in neighborhoods and communities. And these are just some of the sources I've been mentioning that are important to look at. County maps are very important to look at. And these maps are everywhere. And they usually come post-Civil War. This is before the Civil War. And Harford County has one for 1855 and others in the 60s and right up through into the 20th century. But here's Windham County, Vermont, And here's West Townsend, and they're the people who are living in the center area, one right after another. And the rest of the town is shown in neighborhoods as well. And so farmers are going to be living next to farmers. And it's also going to tell you where the grist mill is and where the center of commerce is. So seeing these records, knowing land records, by the way, remember, it's not just the one that buying and selling this, it's who are the bounders that are giving in land records. And those bounders, or the people who own the land around them, could be relatives. Remember, when there's a settlement of an estate, the kids will get a portion of it, and that goes for the girl's husband and her. And they'll be the neighbors of this particular parcel. So it's important to see records that integrate other records and build a community. And maps are a big help. So where are these account books that I'm raving about and diaries that I love coming from? Well, obviously, local, county, state, and historical societies are the main places to get these. A lot of them are in private hands yet. But it's these places that put them in proper care, protect them, and also find a way to identify them in their catalogs and put them in a medium like microfilm or digitization and improve on them by indexing them. So these local, county, state, and so on, historical societies and libraries are vital. And you've got cards like this, the old card system. But the catalogs, are all going to be on the web. How complete they are, will they show all the manuscripts? That's the question. And diaries here, you can see the kind of information. Henry Atwater's diary, it's a day book of a man from Terryville, Plymouth, Connecticut, 1830, looks like 35, and so on, to 1850. But it also will mention what he did for a living. And the thing is, what he did for a living will be a way of categorizing these cards. So if you go in, I've already said, it's the merchants' cards, the store owners, the mill operators. Theirs are good to what? If all you need is to know a town, and you can go through them looking for people in the town that you know you have. And these cross-indexing systems in these libraries will be there by date, they'll be there by event, like a war, they'll be there for occupations, so blacksmiths, merchants, store owners, and things like that. And this is the Historical Society and the Connecticut State Library are the best repositories right now in terms of quantity of diaries and account books that they have.
Are they still on 3 5 cards?
Well, in their manuscript collection they have, yeah, if you want to find them, you can check the website to see whether they have, but this is a big job to get all these codified in the computer. But the cards tell you more than very often unless they digitize these and can alphabetize them at the same time. But yeah, they're just like this. This is Connecticut Historical Society's and manuscript file. And you can see how they're cross-referenced and alphabetical as well. The ratio of diaries to account books is interesting because there's 100 to 200 diaries to 1,500 to 2,000 account books. I mean, it's really an incredible disproportionate representation. But more diaries and journals are published than account books. And we can understand that because of the intimacy of diaries. And diaries are more personal. And diaries vary with the mission of the diary. If you wanted to know about John Adams, he'll be glad to tell you because he wrote for you. He wrote for the public that he was there to serve as a president and so on. So he knew people are going to be interested in how he saw things, as wordy as he was. Whereas people who write diaries like Elmer Clark are writing for themselves. He didn't think I was going to be looking at it. He didn't know. But he wanted to know for his own reasons. Indexes, cross-reference, as I've said. And they're on microfilms. It was a very laborious way. All these say the same thing in these gray ones. But they're, many, many microfilm, and some contain more than one ledger or a diary. But they're the best places to go for them. Now, how many do we have here in this?
Yeah, we have a number. I don't know the exact number, but there's a lot of them.
And I regret that when I was doing research over there a while back, I never did ask. And because most of the places where I have been, like the Suffield Public Library, Kent Library, Stockbridge, Pittsfield, the Herman Melville Home, which is Berkshire Historical, I always asked, because you go into this musty room, and it's shelf after shelf after shelf of these brown. You feel like you better not touch it because your clothes are going to get all this leather on them, But I just smelled the history of every account book, Who are these people? And that's Stockbridge. I think they had 200 account books. Melville's place had less, maybe 10. Yeah. And Suffield's got, in the account book department, I think they had 80. And because I used them in Project Stony Brook, we were able to identify many of them that were on microfilm. Because access is the key. I mean, if we can't bring it to the kids, they're not going to use it. Heck, the teachers won't use it. But if you have it on microfilm, and we have the microfilms, and a microfilm reader, and they know the time period because we made this up. So we gave them, for example, all right, if you're in an old house, or there's an old house on your street, just like Simsbury, they're all over the place, and they have the name, okay, why don't you do that person? Or we go to the cemetery, pick a headstone. That person becomes somebody they're going to research now, and their time period on the headstone now becomes a comparison. Headstone matches the time period where some of these account books might have been, or the census records that we had. And so we tried to get kids into these things, learn from them, but also be the detective. Learn what's out there to use, but also what does it mean when you find these? Because we have the Civil War records too, the Adjutant General's report, and on and on. I tell you, I have a nose for brown books, And my wife and I were doing research in Sheffield, Massachusetts. And, this is a small library. It's in the corner. It's got a beautiful one now. But I think the library was no bigger than this room. And we're going through all the records and, any notes, or whatever the librarian could come up with. And I noticed there was a closet in the corner. And I asked, what's in here? Oh, just some old records. Old?
The years
Keywords.
2 old books, we noticed, turned out to be incredible. They were in private hands. They went to they're being kept there for their own protection. And I'm going to show you in a minute. It's at the end of the show. I wasn't sure we were going to have enough time to tell you about it. But we used those 2 old books to write a history of the Sparks family in that town. I mean, we used a lot of the standard records, but those records turned out to be vital in order to build a family we didn't even know had children. Anyhow, where you find these places like Paper Mania, tag sales, they're all disconnected from the family. But fortunately, we have people like Mary Jane Springman and Betty Guinan who do the town history for East Granby. And in it, diary information is used on World War I, just like in your recent discovery with the Hall papers. And sometimes the history. When I did the World War I talk recently, I was reminded that the diaries were fundamental to doing a history of this particular regiment. And others, these two. Many of them kept diaries during the war, and it was used along with pictures of the men who served and so on, and their military records. And of course, websites have all kinds of records that you could go to. Just Google diaries if you want to. I mean, Google account books. You never know where it's going to send you. The finding aids are important. Most genealogists don't use this, but when we were working with the records on Suffield, we learned what nutmuck was, because we wanted to find out whether other repositories in the area of New England had stuff on Suffield. And lo and behold, the National Archives had it. And when we worked there at the National Archives for a week, we started going through the rooms. And there was a, what do they call it, a kind of railroad broadside. Town meeting, will the railroad be allowed to go through Suffield? Chances are they said no. Anything, that's why Bradley Fields ends at Suffield, but all the noise goes to them. Anyhow, Nutmuck is a Union catalog. They asked repositories, what do you have? Can you tell us if there are any letters or diaries or account books and so on? And it's an index by subject, by name, and so on, and it will tell you where you can find things. Like I put in account books this one time, and up came a reference to Western Kentucky University Library that had about 20 account books, mostly business, for that part of the country. So, periodical source index, Percy, is everywhere now. It's on Ancestry, it's on Find My Past, it's on Genealogy Bank, and it's a periodical source index. So you could just put a category of information like a diary, or you could put a name. And if it was written up in the Detroit Genealogical Society, and they're often writing stuff on Connecticut people, then you can order the magazine from the publisher. Account books, where I found 745 hits, diaries, almost 12,000 on Ancestry.com. So, whether it's someone who's in the same place our people are, or whether it's the same family and so on. You also should go to bibliographies that talk about some of the main sources on a particular state or a finding aid to that state. Now, specifically to diaries, these are 3 good records you will find in many state libraries. And I can't remember whether I saw one of these here. But if you put in Google or go to the computer and ask for diary finding aid, these 3 will come up. This is a descriptive catalog of diaries, orderly books, sea journals for this time period, almost 200 years. Doesn't differentiate between published and unpublished records. So you get a lot of originals and diaries that are in private hands that are going to be mentioned in that one. This one gets into a period prior to 1861. There's some overlapping. And finally, this one gets into published diaries and journals. And the dates for them are identified, and they're cross-referenced to wars or time periods. So there's some overlapping, because diaries don't always go that conveniently. But most of the time we want to see, and I do research on World War I, for example, and give talks on World War I records, and many people in events like the Civil War or World War I or II kept journals. And they're used for the regimental histories, as I've already shown. But if you're looking for something that might even mention your person or how he died, then see if there's a regimental history or a company history of that regiment that your man was part of. and you will be surprised. It'll be illuminating. So these finding aids are there for one to use to get there. Sometimes they're very important, and as I said, they are all you have, and some are very hard. And these are the two I wanted to mention. Sparks Family, Sheffield, Mass. These two are the account books that were in the closet. Captain Abel Thorpe and Giles Andrews account books. They were the next door neighbors of the Sparks family I was writing about, Asa Sparks. And in this record it says, made a pair of shoes for your son's son. We didn't even know the son was married, and we learned about that family from this particular account book. And we wrote the article in the Sparks Family Quarterly, which is now defunct, but they had 30 years of research on Sparks family, and my wife and I were the first to do the Sparks family of New England. Came from the Cambridge area and went to Killingly, and this branch went up to Berkshire County. Anyhow, we used the account book information in there. It blew their mind that a genealogist would throw in the private papers that they were able to find. But it just came natural, because when we found it, it told us something. It gave us information on Asa Sparks. And here's the day book. He's trading with the neighbors, and he's getting credit for some, like using his oxen, or using his wagons, or the person next door needed iron moved, because this is where the foundry was. The furnace was there that provided a lot of the ironwork for the American Revolution up in Sheffield and Salisbury. And so I just wrote from there the pages where the Sparks were found, and was able to use it in our history and so on. And it went as far as we could, and we had the assessor's record, so we knew time periods we didn't know anything about, and getting it in this particular account book gave us a time, place, and name, and events that we were able to use. This is kind of a wrap-up. You can locate all kinds of treasures in personal papers, and including dowries and wills and probate papers and wedding expenses. I mean, whatever was important, they recorded it. And here is a summary of the family, the descent of the family, the Stoughton family. So what they account for, how can they help you and your family? They'll enhance your family history with a day-to-day chronicle of personal activities. And the thing is, you know, we never, it seems, find out what they looked like until we're lucky that they're in the World War I draft registration, and it says how high their height and their weight, and then whether they were bald. I always found that great. You know, what was the connection? Bald to a helmet, maybe? I don't know. Maybe it wouldn't stay on the head if you didn't have hair to hold it. I don't know, but that question was very peculiar. But very few records out there tell that kind of personal stuff, or what their interests were, their feelings, their frustrations. You know, most of this stuff is birth, death, and marriage. And you still need place, you still need names to build that direct line. We don't emphasize enough the extended line. You got to know that. That's why you should fill out the family group sheets. All the brothers and sisters, because their history is your history. And you have to go around them to get some information. But diaries are a big way of getting deeper into a personal life. And I just wanted to kind of tell you one story, and we'll conclude. They document the relationships, the names, the understandings between people that you don't get in the census. It's not yelling at this that we hate this guy next door, or we work with him, we're buying things from him and selling him things. It establishes a firm timeline and a presence and a personal dynamic with people. They are truly personal. It's captured like nothing else. They are readily available and they have challenges, but those challenges are more overcoming as you get to see and read original documents. And we know about the indexing. Sometimes you have to go through the page by page. A writer assumes a lot. They know who they are, and they weren't writing for you to understand better. But they're good, they're personal, and the rewards are very worthwhile. And I use these in particular for a couple of events. And I was glad to see this in the paper last week from this institution. The Hull letters, George Hull died in World War I. And his letters are here, and they're being digitized and made available to everybody. I happen to have a bunch of letters from my uncles who were in World War I, and I'm considering giving them to the state library, where they have a World War I collection plan right now they're trying to put into effect. But the handwriting, the personal stories, the statements, how's Nana, how's Grandpa? I didn't even know they knew them, because they were orphaned at a young age. That is my uncles and my father, and so on. The story is there, and it's being done right here by this building. One last story. I wrote the history of Thomas Stanton, the personality of Thomas Stanton. Well, they usually don't use personality when we're talking history, because personality assumes that you know the pulse. You got some human element here that says this is more than the guy who was written up in the history books, because he was a translator for the colonial forces with the Indians. He's my 10th great-grandfather, and I found many letters between him and the famous John Winthrop Jr., who brought the charter to Connecticut. They were personal friends. And they were both in Hartford for a time, and when Winthrop went to New London, John went after him, took the family and located there. And there was a lot of personal communication exchanged. Unfortunately, Stanton letters didn't stay with the Stanton family, but Winthrop was one of the, like John Adams, they knew they were important. His father was the governor of Massachusetts Bay, and those papers were preserved by their sons and grandsons and so on. So, and are published now up to a certain time frame. And so Thomas Stanton's letters in total are preserved in various places. And the Indian Papers Project at Yale includes some of his letters. But I wrote this for the Stanton Association, Thomas Stanton Society, that I'm a life member of. And what was fascinating is these letters came across in a human form. And I wrote it up in the magazine of the Connecticut Genealogical News. And so I was pleased to be able to do that, but it was so unusual because as a genealogist, I understand the pulse of human affairs is much more than birth, death, and marriage. I mean, it's the flesh and blood. And so people like the diary of Thomas Minor, who was one of the best friends of Thomas Stanton, had some things in it that gave us some humor. Thomas Stanton, Thomas Minor, and William Cheeseborough were the selectmen of Stonington. And you try to imagine they have the power now of the general court to try people. So every month or two they would meet in, of course, the tavern, which was the social place, all right, and where they had to mete out justice. Thomas Minor was one of the straightest conservative religious people of that area. You really need to hear him. I mean, the Sabbath was very important to him, where it was, what was said, and so on. And this particular day, July 22nd, 1662, a little before our time, huh? I mean, so how much did we get from the 1600 from anybody? This was a diary, and it included my grandfather, 10 times removed. Wherein I went astray, he's writing to to whoever, in company of 2 professed friends. They loved me well. But should we all hold on, I fear not only I, but all had fell. My children, when I am dead, let none else but yourselves read this. but do take heed of being with your professed friends misled. They were at the tavern, and all I can imagine is they're feeding them this mead. You know, I'll have another drink there, Tom, you know. And they got him a little unstable. And he probably had a hangover, and he's a very straight guy, teetotaler, I'm sure. And it goes on for a couple of pages, but I'm not going to do that to you. But it was funny. This is tongue-in-cheek. And he's really laying into Tom and William Cheeseborough. On a more personal level, I wanted to know how Thomas felt about his wife. And these two letters were sent to John Winthrop. One in 1649-50, this is when the years were the calendar was being shifted. And so you have that diagonal. And the second one is 1653. God hath visited my wife exceeding sickness. I fear to death, which thing is sad to my heart. This night we fear her departure. It is fever and sore mouth. This was in February 22nd, 1645-50. A letter of November, 3 years later. My wife is very weak, so as I do fear her life, with a pain at her heart, a prickling pain, and an aching in her head, and great looseness 3 or 4 times a day. You can imagine that, right? It's called the runs, you know. He was scared to death. John Winthrop, remember, was an alchemist. He was governor, but he was a scientist first. And he was a doctor because he knew chemistry and he learned how to, things for different elements. A pain at her back, and sleep little, nor take little. Her stomach goes against everything. Of this disease they die at Boston, 12 a day of late. He was a merchant, and he traded with all of New England and Barbados. I pray, sir, of all love, if you can, prescribe anything that may do her good. Whatever it costs me, let it come by this bearer. Isn't that passion? Your loved one, the mother of your 9 children, although they're all young here, and there's more to come, but he spoke his mind. They offer an opportunity to see into the lives of our relatives. They capture emotions, attitudes, skills, even language. I could hear, the peg leg in the movies, Long John Silver, you know, and he's talking English. I'm talking Irish more easily to them. But the way he wrote Thomas Stanton, the way he wrote, the spelling, you got the sound of it. I could hear Thomas Stanton talking through the words, the way he spelled them. And thus I learned more about Thomas Stanton, my great-great-great-whatever grandfather. And I thank you for your kind attention. We went a little bit over. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Funding for Simsbury Community Television is provided in part by contributions from viewers like you. Thank you.